Welcome to CTV News Trendline with Michael Stittle and Nik Nanos.
Nik, you've got a survey that might surprise some of our audience who've been following the weekly ballot tracking numbers. But first, I want to set the stage. Where do the major parties stand now?
Well, the latest Nanos tracking, Conservatives 43, Liberals 25, 18-point gap advantage to the federal Conservatives over the federal Liberals. The New Democrats are at 17. So now, remember, Michael, they were like in the low 20s at one point. Well, now they're at 17%. Bloc at 8, Green Party at 5, and People's Party at around 3%. So, you know what? The advantage that the Conservatives have enjoyed since last August 2023, they continue to enjoy double-digit. Kind of speaks to the mood for change right now. And the election is not today, so who knows what would happen if the election was imminent. But right now, it's pretty clear that the Conservatives have the advantage, and maybe even if they mess up, they have some support to burn and probably still win the federal election.
What about your preferred PM numbers for Trudeau and Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre?
Well, here, let's check out the trend line. And you know what? Pierre Poilievre continues to kind of break into new territory. If you look at the long-term trend, which is like over 10 years old, he's at 38%. That's higher than Stephen Harper 10 years ago at the tail end of his mandate, Andrew Scheer, Aaron O'Toole. So, you know, Pierre Poilievre is doing better than any of those candidates did over the last 10 years. Justin Trudeau back at 22%, so 16 points back. Don't know, numerically ahead of Jagmeet Singh, don't know 14. Jagmeet Singh 13. But, you know, what we're seeing for Pierre Poilievre, you know, people are looking at him as an alternative to Justin Trudeau. And, you know, when you think usually the prime minister has an advantage just by being prime minister, no big advantage right now for Justin Trudeau because he happens to be sitting in the chair.
So that's pretty remarkable, Nik, that Pierre Poilievre, even amongst his conservative predecessors, including Stephen Harper, is still quite high in preferred PM numbers. But you've got another interesting survey you did for the Globe and Mail where you asked Canadians about the credibility of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, and you found some surprising results.
Yeah, I think one thing, can I make a prediction, Michael? I'm going to get hate mail as a result of this from both Conservatives and the Liberals, because these are brutal, can I use the word brutal numbers? You know, we ask Canadians to score the overall credibility of the top two leaders, Pierre Poilievre and Justin Trudeau. So on a scale of 0 to 10, where 10 would be, why don't we call it godlike credibility, and 0, no credibility whatsoever. Well, topping the list between the two of them, not a big surprise who tops the list, but the score, 3.9 out of 10 for Pierre Poilievre. He scores a 3.9 out of 10. Justin Trudeau, a 3.7 out of 10. And Michael, as you know, if you're a parent with kids and they came back with a 37% or 39%, that would be an abject failure. So what does this mean? It means that both of these leaders are highly polarizing as individuals, and that they're, that they don't really score well in terms of credibility. And you know, I think maybe it's a bit of I think what surprised me was how low Pierre Poilievre's numbers were, considering his ballot numbers.
I mean, it's clear based on all of your tracking, Nik, that Canadians are looking for change. I think that's completely fair to say. But how do you balance that against this credibility score for the Conservative leader?
Yeah, well, if you look at this number, what it really means is that 18-point advantage that the Conservatives have over the Liberals, and even Pierre Poilievre's advantage over Justin Trudeau, I think it's 16%. It's all about Pierre Poilievre being an agent of change. This is not about an embrace of all the things that he's been saying and the Conservative platform and the direction and stuff like that. It basically means that Canadians want to punish the Liberals, and they're looking for anyone to punish the Liberals. Pierre Poilievre being the one individual leading the one party that has the greatest chance to be an agent for change. So, you know, I think this this also speaks to potential risk for Pierre Poilievre. Like, let's face it, he's got an 18-point lead in the ballot on the ballot numbers, but you know, if his credibility is so low, that means that if there's ever anything that could, if there's anything ever anything that people learned about him that would not be flattering, why don't we just say that? It could change the dynamic, but you know, he's still got an 18-point advantage.
Does it indicate anything about sort of the policies or policy alternatives that the Conservative Party are putting forward that Canadians might be looking for something more, or from both parties?
Well, not really, but you know, I think the key takeaway here is that even for Pierre Poilievre, you know, the ballot numbers are strong for the party. Him compared to Justin Trudeau scores well. And think of it this way, neither of them are running against perfection, because if they were, they would both lose the election based on these credibility numbers. But Pierre Poilievre only has to be marginally more credible than Justin Trudeau to win the election. Maybe that's the key takeaway.
Nik, you've got another survey as well where you ask Canadians, you know, what they thought, what feelings came out when both leaders were speaking, and I think this one is also pretty brutal.
Yeah, absolutely brutal. And Michael, I would like to say that the opinions expressed are those of Canadians, not of the research firm that did that. You know, we had an open-ended question. People could say whatever they wanted, and we basically asked an open-ended question of the two front-running party leaders. What, you know, what emotions come to mind, or one word emotion that would come to mind whenever either Justin Trudeau or Pierre Poilievre speaks. And there are two separate questions. For Justin Trudeau, you know, you can see the top responses were related to questioning his intelligence, anger, disgust. 6% said that he was believable. The key takeaway for him is that 1 out of every 20 Canadians have something nice to think about, or have a nice emotion, why don't we say that, like believable or trustworthy, when they hear him speak. For Pierre Poilievre, a little better still, you know, 11% said they're hopeful, 11% use words like dishonest, 8% that confident, 8% scared. But the better news for Pierre Poilievre is that, as opposed to 1 out of 20 Canadians who have something nice to say or think about whenever Justin Trudeau speaks, for Pierre Poilievre, it's 1 in 5. So a little more of a positive score, but these are the words or emotions that people articulated that they felt when either one of those two leaders spoke. So not great for either one in terms of their personal brand.
And again, Nik, when we look at the trend of Poilievre leading and your preferred PM numbers, it seems like Canadians are really looking for change and not necessarily who that change is.
Yeah, and you know, the thing is you have to think of it this way. You know, for Pierre Poilievre at least, you know, in the top 4 responses for him, 2 are positive. You know, related to people believe that he's confident. People think of being hopeful whenever he talks. You know, compared to the top ones for Justin Trudeau, which tend to be negative on the top part of the grid. So, you know, so maybe we shouldn't be surprised that the credibility for both of those leaders is so low, like 3.7 and 3.9 respectively, because, you know, every time they talk, this is what comes to mind. Maybe this is the strategy of not being in the news. You know, we'd always say, Michael, we've talked about this in the past. When politicians are not in the news, their numbers go up, because maybe when they're speaking, there's nothing for people to react to. So, you know, maybe the best piece of advice for both Pierre Poilievre and Justin Trudeau is, if you want people's perceptions of you to improve, get out of the news. Don't talk as much. Focus on the other person.
Well, but Nik, both of them have made headlines for comments that they've made in the House of Commons recently. We've seen decorum kind of dip a little. And I wonder how much that sort of plays into how Canadians react to them speaking. I want you to listen to some highlights, or maybe lowlights, I don't know what you would call it, in the House that have come out this week.
Why did he hire the worst mortgage broker in the world to be our finance minister? Today we have a motion that will be voted in the House to permanently ban hard drugs. Will this government vote for that motion, or will they admit that they plan to legalize drugs again after the next election?
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative leader is wearing more makeup than I am today. Now, I think it's wonderful.
I'm going to ask the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance to withdraw that comment. We don't comment on the appearances of members. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, I withdraw that comment.
I honestly don't know what to say, Nick. What's your takeaway from that?
Does that kind of remind you, Michael, is like, being in the schoolyard with someone who's it, yeah, oh yeah, yeah. That's it's kind of like one of those things. And what's interesting, listening to the exchange between Poilievre and Freeland, is it's actually on point from a polling perspective. So what did Pierre Poilievre do? He questioned the intelligence of the Minister of Finance using slanderous words related to mortgage brokers. I think they would be very upset to hear them being used as a political prop. And, basically also Pierre Poilievre being, for all intents and purposes, disgusted with the Liberal policy related to drugs. And then, and which is exactly what the polling data suggests, what comes to mind when people think of Justin Trudeau. So he's on point. And you know what? Chrystia Freeland, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, also on point, because we know, at least from the polling, and I guess she used the cosmetics thing, but the whole idea that perhaps Pierre Poilievre is dishonest. So I think both of them are on point, believe it or not. They probably didn't see this poll, or the poll was done actually before this happened. But the reality is that the approach is on point. But then again, do you think if you're Pierre Poilievre, it's like, oh, they're just so mean to me. They said that I wear makeup. It's like, is that the best? If you're Pierre Poilievre and you're doing a full-on attack, if the response is, oh yeah, you have too much makeup on, I'm sure, and this is sarcasm, that Pierre Poilievre was absolutely devastated with that kind of jab in the House of Commons. That said, Chrystia Freeland had to apologize for that particular comment, because it probably could have hurt Pierre Poilievre's feelings, maybe. Anyways, I just, you know what, Michael, this is in the context of people worrying about inflation, worrying about the cost of groceries, worrying about paying for housing. And we get this, pretty petty, unsubstantive bickering where, they're basically taking pot shots. And why don't they just tell each other that they don't like each other or what they stand for? Maybe we just and then just talk about solutions. But both of these attacks on point, based on how Canadians feel right at this particular point in time, and when a lot of the leaders speak.
Nick, I think we're going to take a quick break now, but when we come back, we'll look at how the economy is playing into polling numbers on both sides of the border. Nick, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is on a charm offensive in the U.S., promoting Team Canada and business ties with our southern neighbors. It's interesting that I think North Americans on both sides of the border are taking kind of a dim view of the economy. They're pretty pessimistic, and I'm wondering how this is playing out in the polling numbers.
Well, what's interesting is, you look at consumer confidence sentiment, right? Opinion, and then you look at the data, and people in both the United States and Canada are much more negative and uncertain about the future in terms of how they feel compared to the actual economic numbers. And the interesting thing is, you can see that we have an incumbent government in Canada that's on the ropes when we look at the ballot numbers. A lot of that has to do with them being in power for such a long time, but another part of that has to do with what I'll call joyless prosperity, where people hear numbers that say, you know what, your finances actually aren't that bad. But then people go, it doesn't feel that way, and that there's a fundamental disconnect. And we have the same thing in the US, where, when we look at the consumer confidence data out of Michigan, that there's a disconnect between that and how people are actually feeling. And then as a result, Biden on paper, from the economic point of view, should be way ahead of Trump. Not so much, based on the polling in the United States.
Nick, why it's interesting. Why isn't President Joe Biden getting the recognition that he might deserve for his economic policies and that success?
Well, because depending on in the United States, depending on where you sit in the political spectrum, you have a completely different view of things. So if you happen to be a Republican, for example, regardless of what the economic numbers are, you think things are terrible, that they were better under Donald Trump, and that you need to get rid of Biden, and that if Trump comes back, things will be better. And then the other kind of flip side of the coin is for the Biden supporters that they're much more likely to be positive about the economy and fearful of Trump being president. But when you look at the trend line by 538, who I have a lot of confidence in, and they're a pretty good aggregator. It's basically on the popular vote. It's almost straight down the middle. It's like 41-40 between Trump and Biden. But the thing is that when you convert that into the Electoral College, Trump's got a little bit of an advantage. I think in the latest numbers from 270 to Win, which is another outfit that converts polling into Electoral College votes, I think the Republicans or Trump would have 235 votes, 226 for Biden, and about 77 that are still too close to call. But it's just if I said Canadians were polarized, well, Americans are very polarized, much more polarized than Canadians, and as a result, this drives views of the economy and also electoral preferences.
I mean, Nick, we're currently seeing Trump in court where he's facing allegations of hush money payments, and it doesn't seem to have affected his polling numbers whatsoever.
Nope, not at all. Well, and you have to realize that for a lot of those committed Republicans, the January uprising after the last election, they believe that it was justified. There's another segment of the Republican core vote that is pro-life and believe that Donald Trump delivered on that for them and will stick with him because of that. And it's like, it doesn't matter what's in the news. It hasn't really, like, what else could be said? I'm not sure what else could be said in terms of Donald Trump, but we have to realize, and I think this is what's critical, Donald Trump is not responsible for this. He is a symptom of a broader issue and a broader views that have to do with people feeling that they can't pay for the bills, they can't get ahead, they're negative about the future, and they are ready for change and to kind of smash institutions into little bits because they don't feel that institutions, global trade, all that kind of stuff is helping them because they feel financially at risk.
Nick, for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he's over there to try and strengthen business ties. He also wants to host potentially the Three Amigos Summit this year. We're seeing inflation cooling, which should ease the pocketbook strain for some Canadians. Do you think that this is a path of success for Trudeau if he's seen to be stronger on the economy and Canadians start to believe it?
I'm not sure if it's going to make a big difference because people have such firm views of Justin Trudeau. Think of it this way. What's clear is that people want change. So there's only 3 types of changes that can realistically take place in Canada. The most obvious is for the Conservatives to win. That would be change. The second one would be for the Liberals to have a different leader. That would be change, different type of change. The third one would be for Justin Trudeau to change. And what I mean by that is to focus on a new set of priorities, like why don't we call it Justin Trudeau version 2.0. That is not the greatest hits. Because right now, Michael, the greatest hits, which is what he's been running on, won't work. It won't be enough to move the numbers unless there's some type of catastrophic revelation about Pierre Poilievre, or Pierre Poilievre messes up. I can't see the guy messing up. He's pretty disciplined.
Nick, I think we'll leave it there for this show. As always, thanks very much.
Take it easy.